Marston is one of the standout characters in the admittedly sparse literature on the Nimrod expedition, and according to members of the expedition, Marston was always full of animal spirits, had the frame and face of a prize fighter and the disposition of a fallen angel, and was not a scientific man. This last one because, while collecting rocks with Professor David, he became tired of adding to his heavy bag, and he began to take one rock out of his pack for every new one that the prof gave him, while the prof cheerfully thought that all his specimens were being stored. So he was more solicitous towards animals than scientists, often engaging in comical rescues when they didn't need rescuing, such as removing penguins from their creches. And if it was not for him, the hut at Cape Royds would have been a much grimmer place. With his flair for interior design, he elaborately painted the curtains and entryway signs of the hut's berths, and his memories for music hall tunes and sea shanties made him a natural choice for resident DJ. Not only did he play records on the gramophone, but on many a night he gave impromptu performances of music and monologues to entertain the men, wearing various improvised costumes and makeup. So according to the anonymous caption writer of one Nimrod album, Marston was very fond of dressing as a girl. He made the dress out of Murray's muslin tonettes and used hemp from old rope for hair. How creative. Miss Putty appeared a few times in the hut to entertain and flirt with the men. But the cranky Scottish surgeon, Alistair Forbes Mackay, was so displeased by her pressing attentions that he threatened violence unless she made herself scarce. And Douglas Mawson remarked sadly, "It was all very well, but he was not the real thing." So during the winter, Marston was in charge of producing the lithographed illustrations for the expedition book Aurora Australis, which was a nightmarishly difficult process in the cramped quarters of the hut. And when summer arrived, he was a hard sledger and worker. During an expedition up Mount Erebus, he rescued Priestley from a precarious position on the ice-covered slopes, warming Priestley's frozen extremities against his own stomach, much to his own discomfort. He painted and sketched in frigid temperatures and helped move tons of supplies to Hut Point on depot journeys. And as member of the support party, he did not accompany Shackleton all the way to the pole, although at one point Wilde complained about Marshall and Adams. "If we only had Joyce and Marston here instead of these two grub-scoffing useless beggars, we would have done it easily." So I bet he would have loved to hear that. So after the Nimrod expedition returned home in 1909, the explorers were celebrated for weeks in London. Priestley, Wilde, Day, and Joyce slept 4 to 2 beds in a cramped room in Kensington, and then spent luxurious weeks drinking and playing games at Priestley's parents' home in Tewkesbury. Marston was darting in and out at the time, as he was spending a good deal of time in Petersfield to court young Hazel Roberts, a girl he had met through mutual art school friends. So in early 1910, Marston accompanied Bernard Day, Reginald Skelton, and Captain Robert Falcon Scott to Norway, where they were to test the motor sledges for Scott's upcoming expedition. Marston's position on this jaunt was unclear, but he and Day were good friends from the Nimrod, and Marston probably couldn't pass up a chance to spend time sketching and drinking in such beautiful environs, and also possibly testing out some new designs for an easily raised poop tent that he and Shackleton had conceived of. And later in 1910 and into 1911, Marston spent a lot of time sort of hanging out at Shackleton's expedition offices, which were soon taken over by Douglas Mawson to prepare for his Australasian Antarctic expedition. At a dinner given by Shackleton to celebrate Priestley and Day heading out again on Scott's expedition, the famous singer Harry Lauder performed, and Priestley recounts how Marston performed his impression of Lauder to Lauder's amusement. And when Scott's expedition members visited the Cape Royds hut of the Nimrod soon afterwards, Edward Wilson only knew Marston by reputation, but remarked in his diary that Marston must have been a great humorist. And he was. Priestley reported in his Nimrod diary one of Marston's famous yarns. Priestley said, "Marston amused us very much tonight with a tale of a tramp who lay asleep and allowed all the neighboring insects to crawl over him until the local hornet settled in his nose. Then he arose, swore vigorously, and remarked as he brushed himself, 'Now you'll all have to go.'" So, though he hadn't joined the party in London or Tewkesbury as much as the other men, Marston kept in touch with many of them after the expedition, including Alistair Forbes Mackay, who wrote to him rather pathetically from an alcohol rehabilitation center. Aeneas Mackintosh, who wrote to him about how he dearly wished to have one final wallow, good or bad, in Antarctica. We know how that ended. And Frank Wilde, who he accompanied on a 2-month yacht cruise from Liverpool up around the coast of Scotland. So in 1913, Marston published with Nimrod biologist James Murray their volume Antarctic Days, recording the lighter side of exploration. It was written mostly by Murray and illustrated by Marston, although it included a long essay from Marston detailing his continuing passion for sea shanties. And now this volume, much to my sadness, goes for thousands of dollars as one of the most sought-after Antarctic first editions. I think they've got one out there. So Marston married Hazel Roberts in the summer of 1913, and their daughter Heather was born later that year. But his next adventure was around the corner. And no, it was not a star turn on the music hall stage, as one Miss Julia Levy proposed, and she said, "I understand you have an exceedingly good voice, and if you care to entertain engagements on the music halls pending the departure of the expedition, I shall be glad to look after your interests." So, it seems like he had fans. So as a loyal Shackleton man, well-liked by the boss and part of his inner circle, Marston was one of the men first announced to be taking part in the trans-Antarctic expedition, and he played a central role in its planning. But it's a curious fact that he did not take the same role as cheerful clown on the Endurance as he had on the Nimrod. Now, this may have been because of the role of the entertainer had been filled by Shackleton with one Leonard Hussey, the cheerful banjo-playing meteorologist hired because he had a funny face, and also by photographer Frank Hurley, whose pranks on Mawson's expedition had been legendary. Now, how Marston felt about his role as official visual documentator being usurped by Hurley is unclear. He told Thomas Ord-Lees that peace at any price was the way to remain equanimous on a polar expedition, and he didn't pick fights, even though he complained in a letter to his wife that Lees was the most awful snob he had ever come across. Now, it was perhaps harder than he thought it would be to leave his wife and child behind. Shackleton had an increasing dislike for Marston during the trans-Antarctic expedition, perhaps because of this melancholy, which was so unlike the man he had been on Nimrod. Now, there were still some moments of levity. He dressed in drag and played records, as on Nimrod, and elaborately decorated his bunk, ever the interior designer and craftsman. Riding the motor sledge, he play-acted at being an ice cream man, handing out treats to Hussey and others pretending to be Cockney urchins. And he and Wilde shaved each other's heads, and Marston painted an absurd face onto Wilde's bald head that he then displayed through the neck of his sweater, which everybody loved. But when the Endurance went down, so did Marston's mood even further. So far from his beloved family, he was fearful and depressed. He was one of the few men who expressed outward pessimism about their situation, going so far as to remark to Hussey that he'd rather commit suicide by laudanum rather than spend a winter on the ice. And now, this must have really pissed Shackleton, the optimist, off. So, while perhaps not cheerful, he did remain important to the expedition. On Elephant Island, his oil paints were used to caulk up the seams of the James Caird in order to make it seaworthy. He also planned and executed the idea of upturning the 2 other boats in order to create their shelter. And he was the owner and reader of the Penny Cookery book, which provided the men with so much imaginative fuel during those long months. But he also suffered being the butt of the joke sometimes, being teased for his girth by Worsley and offered food to fatten him up further for eventually being eaten. I mean, leave him alone. But he had his final triumph when he was the first person to spot the approaching Yelcho and alert the men. He said, "Ship ho!" And then he also said, "Hadn't we better light a fire?" And everyone was like, "What?" So returning, probably very gratefully from his ordeal, he penned an article for the Manchester Guardian in late 1916. Now, this is a first-hand account of something much mentioned by histories of the Endurance expedition, but not often examined in depth. How astonishing it must have been to return to a world at war. And he said, "Getting into touch once more with the outer world, our senses were stunned by the amazing facts we were called upon to accept. The world seemed mad, and we its only sane members. He went on, the depth of the change in the life of London dawned on us gradually. Day by day, small unfamiliar incidents multiplied until we felt strangers in our own home. The armed guards on our railways and docks, the warnings to the public in railway carriages, the convalescent soldiers in the street, the searchlights which scan the sky, and the cheerful way in which dark, clear nights are spoken of as good Zepp weather, all combined to overpower the homecomer with strangeness. And that's the group of Endurance members returning on the steamer in 1916. So Marston's life after Endurance did not include military service. Perhaps he was excluded on account of his weight or health. He had another child with Hazel, but sadly they separated at some point in the 1920s. He worked as an art teacher at Bedale's School and subsequently as the director of the Rural Industries Bureau, turning his love of handicrafts into an impressive career which took him all around the country to local fairs and village workshops. He attended the yearly meetings of the Antarctic Club in the 1930s and often performed sea shanties at local gatherings, as well as a famous penguin impression. And he passed away in 1940 at age 58 from a heart attack. And this is Marston at the Antarctic Club, and you can see him surrounded by other Shackleton men, including Clark and Joyce and Wordy right there. So as someone that has worked with comedians professionally at the Edinburgh Fringe and elsewhere, I am fascinated by the role a comedian plays on a polar expedition. Shackleton placed a very high emphasis on morale, and putty was a central part of his scheme to keep the spirits high on Nimrod. Many other members remarked in their diaries on his antics, costumes, and musical skills, and the fact that he does not emerge so vividly as a member of the Endurance speaks both to the higher density of standout characters on that expedition, with Shackleton perhaps having learned lessons from his last one about who to hire, as well as Marston's lowered capacity for silliness due to his family situation and increased melancholy. But as his continued involvement with the Antarctic community shows, he treasured the memories of his polar adventures and was proud of the role that he played as Shackleton's artist, craftsman, and entertainer. So, what is a polar expedition without a sense of humor? Probably something close to hell. The Belgica expedition, noted by subsequent explorers as pretty much the exact template of what not to do, was saved in a psychological sense, not only by Frederick Cook's invention of light therapy to lift polar ennui, but by Emil Rakowitz's body and pointed caricatures, which so cheerfully satirized their own dire situation and allowed them to see the humor in it. And the naval atmosphere of the Discovery expedition was likewise lightened by the South Polar Times, full of comic doggerel and cartoons, which acted as an escape valve for some of the interpersonal frustrations of close quarters on the frozen-in ship. On that expedition, like the Arctic overwinterings of old, organized comedic theatricals were performed as a company, encompassing the long tradition of polar drag. And while no comic performances took place on Scott's Terra Nova, a new edition of the South Polar Times cast expedition members in various caricature roles, with geologist Griff Taylor finding occupation as a prolific comic prose stylist and Edward Wilson illustrating his articles. And now Roald Amundsen might be seen as a humorlessly efficient explorer, but even he hosted a drag performance aboard the Fram on their way to the Antarctic, starring, it's gone. It's okay, I don't have a picture of that. Starring Hjalmar Geertsen. So hiring for a polar expedition, both personal and professional qualifications are in play. Now, Scott, focusing on scientific excellence as he did, was very lucky in hiring a few men who also just happened to be very funny. The second winter, with a diminished party after the death of the Polar Party and the departure home of many more men, including Griffith Taylor, was remarked upon by many to be suffering from a lack of humor and entertainment, which contributed to ennui and enduring trauma. Had Taylor been around to lighten the mood, might Cherry Garrard have returned a slightly less scarred man? That is a topic for another presentation. But I hope that I was able to illuminate the life and times of George Marston, a very unique explorer for you, and in doing so, show how even the lesser-known members of Shackleton's expedition had an important part to play. And for all of you Explorers Club members planning your own expeditions, wanting to walk in Shackleton's footsteps, maybe consider taking someone along just because they're creative and fun. I don't know, just a thought. And that's it, and thank you very much.
You never disappoint, Allegra. Thank you so much. Richard, would you like to come forth and explain the next move?
By the way, what a great morning. I hope you guys are thinking, what smashing, really smashing. I have the duty to introduce lunch. So, and you're not getting served lunch here is another key part of lunch. By the way, for those of you I've not met, I'm Richard Garriott. I'm the current president, at least for the next 2 months, of the Explorers Club before I finish my 4th year of a maximum of 3. And but for lunch today, we're going to take a break for lunch. If you go out the front door of the Explorers Club here and you go 1 full block to the east, this is Park Avenue right next to us. The next one out is Lexington. There's a deli there called Hunter Deli. There's the standard place most of us lunch, or at least I think the highest frequency place, an Italian place called Bella Blue. There's a nice cafe or a French style place called Cognac. And a little further down, a half a block further, actually it's a full block further, another little taco place called Tacombi. And for those who want to go the other direction around the block, on the same physical block we're on, but kind of opposite side, is a place called Le Charlot. So anyway, I recommend one of those stops or more for you, and we'll circle back. I don't have nobody told me the time. 2 o'clock is the rendezvous time. See you all back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Are you enjoying being involved in our little group? It's not so little now, actually. Yes, okay. Oh, right, okay. If you ever read Menson's book about finding shipwrecks, no, but if you ever did, we get mentioned a heck of a lot in the book, so so a lot of people have joined us because of that. Oh well, you're here, that's all that matters. Thank you for coming. Oh, good. Well, it's my wedding anniversary yesterday, so it's a good time to have a celebration. Are you coming to the dinner tonight? Yes, you do. All right. Well, of course you have, yeah. It's a long way. Yeah, my wife is Nepalese, and I go there every year. Nepal. We spend 3 months there, so yeah. Pokora. Okay. Hello.
Hi, Robert Moore.
Hello, Robert.
Nice to meet you.
And are you also a member of my Facebook group? Or
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I don't do social media.
Oh, well, fair enough.
I apologize.
Sorry, I apologize.
So I'm a member here.
Yes.
And I belong to the New York Yacht Club.
Ah.
And we have, so tell me your role here at the Royal Geographic Society.
Well, I'm not a member. I'm a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. Yeah.
So years ago, I was there. This is London Albatross.
Ah, yes.